Here in this bucket, we have a desert hedgehog that is Paraechinus aethiopicus. And why is it in a bucket? Well, it was being harassed by some dogs, and we are several hundred meters away from the area where it was collected, and now I'm going to release it. Thought I might show you guys as I did so. Well, I chose this area because it has a fair amount of rocks, and that's where these hide. They are nocturnal, so there's a good chance that after I let it out, it'll just start wandering around, but it might hide as well. I'm just going to tip this bucket very slowly and carefully. Come on, little hedgehog, you can do it. These guys are found in the Arabian Peninsula, part of the Levant, and parts of North Africa. And they mostly eat insects out here, but they also eat bits of fruit and eggs that they find on the ground and chicks of birds. You might get a little bit scared when I move this bucket, but I don't want it to roll. And these are in the order Unintentional, which means that his closest relative might be a desert shrew out here. I don't know which shrews live out here, but that would be it. Tonight we are in the desert of southern Jordan, and we are looking for what used to be Arabian Fat-Tailed Scorpions. And even though these are not the real thing, they are still quite recognizable, and they are also quite common, so shouldn't be too difficult to find a few. We have our first fat-tailed scorpion down here. This one is an adult. First off, I think the common name here is pretty obvious. These have a fat tail, but you were probably wondering why I'm calling them the fake Arabian fat-tailed scorpion. There have been some recent descriptions of new Androctonus from the Middle East, namely Androctonus sumericus, turkiensis, and Tihamicus. These fat-tailed scorpions are from in and around Iraq, Saudi, and Turkey. This has pretty much severed two halves of what used to be considered Androctonus crassicauda. The original and true Androctonus crassicauda are from Iran, that is where the type is, so these western half Androctonus that we're looking at are likely just an undescribed species. I believe Androctonus crassicauda is considered to be a complex. The Androctonus crassicauda lookalikes in the Levant are not the only ones that have been cut out of the original distribution. There are unassigned ones ranging all the way to the United Arab Emirates. But the one issue that all of this causes is that the dominant common name of the real Androctonus crassicauda and Iran is now obsolete. Arabian fat-tailed scorpion doesn't make any sense anymore. There's a little tuberculated gecko down here, or Bunopus tuberculatus, running around. Tuberculated geckos is a name for the entire genus, but these specific ones are the southern tuberculated geckos, also known as the Arabian desert geckos. This common name, along with the specific epithet, is quite apt for this species in the genus, because as you can see, they are tuberculated. They have quite a few scales that are significantly raised above the skin, and that gives them this kind of crocodilian appearance. And they have especially prominent scales on the tail here, as you can see. I'm not quite sure how to describe this, but I've noticed that these geckos don't feel as fragile as other ones. They're quite tough, like your more average lizard as opposed to a gecko specifically. Bunopus tuberculatus is the most widespread species in its genus. It's found from Pakistan west to Jordan, where we are, and from Turkmenistan south to Yemen. If I recall correctly, this might be a species complex. Speaking of which, if the species Bunopus blandforti is a valid species, this might be it. We have our second fat-tailed scorpion sitting beneath this sandstone here. And this one is also an adult male, but a little bit smaller than the last one. Presumably its burrow is up in here somewhere. Of all the scorpions that live in the far south of Jordan, and there are at least a dozen, this one is the most resistant. This tends to be true for Androctonus wherever they're found, not just this species and not just in this area. Quite remarkably, these do show up in areas where there's no plant life. I'm talking about desert pavement and also rocky areas with little going on ecologically. When I was in the United Arab Emirates, I found a lot of Androctonus, also undescribed and related to these ones, many of which were living in alkali flats that stretched for many kilometers and had very little plants, if at all. In other words, as the habitat gets really harsh, these are often the only scorpion left. Even though you can find them in these harsh conditions, They do have a noticeable preference, at least in this area, for packed sand paired with many bushes. Actually, the area that we found this particular scorpion is quite exemplary of the kind of habitat I most often encounter them in. Quite a large camel spider down here that seems to be confused by my light. I already did a video on these, and I'll link it in the description. But I thought we'd take a look at this one just really quickly because it's larger than any of the ones that were in that video. Ow. This one's much bitier than those ones too. Here it is. As you can see, it isn't too happy with me, but I won't take too long. One of the things I wanted to mention is since the video I made on these, I've found quite a few more, probably a couple dozen. And I've practically confirmed that that tiny one that I showed in the video is indeed a juvenile of this species, because since making that video, I basically found every instar, including the more important ones with transitional colors, which tend to be about a third the size of the adults. You can go now. Not towards me. Go that way. Definitely quite difficult to see from up here. But down here is Eremiaphila brunneri, this little mantis on the rock, which admittedly should not be out at this time. These Eremiaphila mantises are called ground mantises, but this particular species doesn't have a common name for itself. This species is found in the Levant and the Arabian Peninsula, specifically in areas that are associated with coastal mountains. This is one of several Eremiaphila species that can be found in the Levant, and among them, this is arguably the most common one. It seems that about half of the Levant mantis species are terrestrial, and practically all of them exhibit crypsis, but this can come in a few forms. Some imitate pebbles, some sand, and some sticks. This one seems to be a kind of combination between the first two. These are overwhelmingly diurnal. In fact, I don't think it really is possible to see them at night unless they're disturbed, which I believe is what happened here. I think the only reason it was scuttling around is because I kicked the rock that it was sleeping under. Since Eremiaphila are daytime active and have ways of dealing with the heat, at night they're almost always hiding somewhere along the ground surface. Because we are currently walking on a level rock surface, I thought I would take this opportunity to show you a couple of board games, both Egyptian. The first one I'll show you, quite ancient. I think it's from at least a couple thousand years ago. And the other one is a little bit more recent, if I understand correctly. Down here is our first board game, and this is called Three Men's Morris, or at least by the British. Unlike the second game I'm going to show you, this one has remained quite popular. It's quite a simple game too. 2 players, each with 3 pieces, and you lay these 3 pieces on intersections on the board. The goal is to make a straight line while blocking your opponent's straight line effort, much like tic-tac-toe. Here is our second game. This is Sija, and this one is a little bit odd because it has an even number of placements. This one is a 6x6. But essentially, there's a piece in every single placement except for one usually, and it's half from one person, half from the other, and you're supposed to corner your opponent's pieces until you've taken over the board. I know of a second board like this, so I'll go show you that one right now. And down here is our second Sija board. This one here makes more sense to me because it is a 5x5, and 25 allows for a centerpiece to be left blank, essentially. We have another Paraechinus coronata walking across the board here. Not a worthy opponent. We have a small scorpion in the genus Buthacus down here in the sand. I mentioned this Buthacus right here in the last video when I was shooting another species of Buthacus, and they do look quite similar. If you're wondering how I know that they're 2 different species, I don't really feel like explaining, so please just trust me. These kinds of scorpions just tend to look similar by virtue of being sand-dwelling scorpions, but this one's habitat isn't the same as the other Buthacus. These ones aren't as sammophilous. They live in much rockier areas with just a small layer of sand on the top, whereas the other ones live in dunes. These are much smaller and more densely populated than the other Buthacus species, but the stretch of habitat that I'm able to find them in is much shorter. It's a band of habitat that spans less than a half kilometer on the side of the mountain. And at least in this area, they seem to have 0 overlap with one another. Because these live in rockier areas, They're sympatric with far more other scorpion species than the other Buthacus in the dunes. There's a Ptyodactylus guttatus up here on the wall. These guys are a little quick and they do drop their tail, so I'm going to catch it off camera with 2 hands. These are commonly referred to as the Sinai fan-fingered gecko, and they live in the desertic areas of the Levant, into Sinai, and the northern Nile Valley. And these are sympatric with the yellow fan-fingered gecko, that is Ptyodactylus hasselquisti, and the closest I've ever seen these 2 species to one another was about 15 meters. But the specific epithet guttatus is what allows us to differentiate these species. Guttatus means spotted or speckled, and that is something that accurately describes these geckos, but not really hasselquisti. Hasselquisti will usually be banded, blotched, or pale. As the common name of the genus suggests, these are known for their enlarged distal phalanges. This is what helps them live on these rock walls and hide in crevices. And these crevices are also where they lay their eggs, usually in pairs, and they actually stick them to the rocks with their own adhesive. We have our 3rd fat-tailed scorpion here in the rocks. I think this one is an adult female, unlike the last 2. Being relatively large, venomous, common, and widespread as a genus, Androctonus have been recorded preying on many different animals, but their diet mainly consists of other arthropods, namely insects, but also other scorpions and camel spiders. They also occasionally feed on small snakes, lizards, carrion, and small rodents. And they don't seem to be too tolerant of each other, but I could not find evidence of cannibalism in the species in the wild. There is one group of animals that they are especially tolerant to, however, and that is darkling beetles, or beetles belonging to the family Tenebrionidae. These can be found in the burrows of Androctonus scorpions. In my area, these scorpions don't have many predators, but their primary threat is likely other larger scorpions when they are juveniles. And second to that might be the desert hedgehog, like the one that we saw earlier, as they do feed on scorpions. Last thing regarding these scorpions, and I should have mentioned this earlier, the genus name Androctonus translates to man and the infinitive to kill, effectively meaning man-killer. And though it isn't the same scorpion that we're looking at right now, the specific epithet crassicauda means thick tail, and I believe both of these translate from Greek. Well, that will be all for this video of looking for fake Arabian fat-tailed scorpions. So I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.